Workforce Development will come to order. I note that a quorum is present, and without objections, the chair is recognized to call recess at any time. Good morning and welcome to today's hearing on the Subcommittee on Higher Education and Workforce Development. I want to thank our witnesses for joining us to shine light on how students and families navigate one of the most important and most confusing financial decisions they will ever face: choosing and paying for college. The process of determining the true cost of college is clouded in mystery. Colleges and universities routinely advertise prices that bear little resemblance to what families ultimately will pay. Too often, aid packages filled with unclear or deceptive figures. This is not how major financial decisions are made in other parts of our economy. When you buy a home, federal law requires clear disclosure, so you know exactly what you will owe. When you purchase a car, consumer protections guard against deceptive pricing. Yet when it comes to college degrees, an investment that can rival or exceed the cost of a home, students are left in the dark. The consequences of this lack of transparency are serious. Studies show that unexpected costs are the leading reasons for students dropping out. Families who believe they're making a sound investment are blindsided by hidden expenses. Many borrowers are left in the dark without a degree or credentials. Taxpayers also suffer. When students borrow too much, they risk default, leaving taxpayers to foot the bill. We also know that institutional practices such as tuition discounting and aid displacement make systems even more opaque. Colleges use sophisticated algorithms to decide who gets a discount, often based not on merit or need, but how likely a student is to enroll. One student may pay tens of thousands more than his classmate with similar qualifications simply because of the way the student's FAFSA was processed. That is not fair to students or families. The good news is that solutions are within reach. This committee has previously advanced bipartisan proposals to bring sunlight to college pricing. Republicans have proposed legislation that would establish standardized financial aid offers to ensure students and families can accurately compare college costs. We have also proposed improvements to make net price calculators more accountable, accessible, and user-friendly. And we're exploring the concept of maximum price guarantees so families know from day one the most they'll ever pay for a degree. These reforms are rooted in a simple idea. Students and families deserve honesty and transparency. They should have access to information they need to budget, plan, and make college choices that are best for them without a lawyer or an accountant. Today, we will hear from experts, including leading economists and a seasoned college administrator. The testimonies will help us recognize where transparency is working and where it's not, and what colleges can do to ensure that no student or family faces sticker shock, that's often way too late. I look forward to a strong discussion and working with my colleagues to make college pricing transparent, eliminating the guesswork, and empowering students, enhancing accountability, and safeguarding taxpayers. Before I yield to the ranking member for a statement, I want to take a moment to acknowledge today that Chance Russell's last day is today in committee. For the last 6 years, first under leadership of Chairman Fox and now under leadership of Chairman Walbert, Chance has been a trusted colleague and a true expert in higher education policies. Across the House, Senate, and Education Committee, he has earned deep respect for his insight and leadership. And most recently, Chance poured countless hours into crafting proposals that became law through a reconciliation. Work that will leave a lasting mark on the families and students nationwide. Chance, your creativity, dedication, and hard work have made this team stronger every single day. On behalf of all of us, thank you for everything you've done and you've given, and we wish you the very best. And I'd like to take a few minutes to yield to our full committee chair, Chairman Walbert.
Thank you so much. That's kind to Mr. Chairman. Chance, we will miss you. We'll hold it against you for a while that you're leaving us. But to come in as a new chairman of this committee into reconciliation, into student loan debt payoff, all the financial things, and know that I had someone who Chairman Fox said, make sure you keep him on. Had that stamp of approval, and then to find out as we sat and talked with college presidents, financial aid officers, and others, that I could always turn to you who had the answer. Whether they wanted to hear it or not, at times it was the true answer, but also a willingness to say, we will look even further as we get better numbers and make sure it all works. That was immensely helpful to me, and I'll never forget that. And also to know that you were very capable in working with our friends across the aisle to do it in, if it possible, bipartisan way, to take suggestions, to take concerns, and move them forward. That was immensely helpful as well. And then finally, to know that you scheduled your wedding around all of this work and the sacrifice that meant. I want you to thank your wife also. I wish you both the best in the future, and we know that you'll be around where we will have a chance to work with you. But God bless you, Chance. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, would the gentleman yield?
Absolutely. Yes. Somebody else.
Thank you. I just wanted to add in a statement. When they said he works with the Democrats, we've had some very contentious issues in this committee. We sometimes agree, sometimes don't, but being able to communicate and work together has been extremely important. I understand that Chance is going to the Department of Education, so we'll have somebody there that we can work with and look forward to that relationship. So thank you very much, Chance, for your years of service.
Okay, we're going to miss you, buddy, for sure. With that, I'd like to yield to the ranking member.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to congratulate the gentleman and thank him for his work as well. Thank you to our witnesses today for being here. I want to first acknowledge the horrific events that occurred last week. Former Representative Gabby Giffords said it best: democratic societies will always have political disagreements, but we must never allow America to become a country that confronts those disagreements with violence. This summer, America has seen multiple political motivated attacks because dangerous people turn to guns to express their disagreements. Both parties have been targeted, and both parties share a moral and patriotic duty to take meaningful action. Now, onto the topic at hand. Attending a reputable college or university remains one of the most critical pathways to economic success and financial freedom that people have access to. The cost of higher education is getting higher and higher every year, to the point where getting a degree has become financially unattainable for many Americans. Our higher education system must be an engine of economic mobility for all students, not an instrument for preserving the elite status of wealthy families. As the cost of college continues to rise, students and families also struggle to understand the true cost of attendance and how they can expect to spend out of pocket on higher education. Too often, families are left to navigate a complex and confusing system of fees and tuition rates and financial aid options without clear guidance. And this can lead to sticker shock as families grapple with the total cost of a college education. I spent 40 years on a college campus, and I understand what students and families go through. In my home state of North Carolina, the North Carolina College Connect program removes barriers and provides direct pathways for high school students to apply for and attend college. Programs like North Carolina College Connect cut through much of the bureaucratic red tape that comes with applying for college and help students and families understand the process. But there's much more to be done. Greater price transparency is essential to ensuring that students and families can make informed decisions about their future. Institutions of higher education can and must do more to be more transparent with students and their families about the cost of attendance and about their student aid options. That being said, more transparency will not address many of the root causes of the rising cost of college. Right now, our country is facing a college affordability crisis that has been made exponentially worse by the Trump administration and congressional Republicans. And so the Big Ugly Bill raises costs for current and future borrowers by forcing student loan borrowers into unaffordable repayment plans, eliminating resources to help struggling borrowers, and pushing students toward the predatory private loan market by eliminating graduate plus loans, capping parent plus loans, and limiting access to Pell Grants. And to make it worse, in March, the Trump administration ordered sweeping reductions in force, RIFs, at the Department of Education, laying off over half of the staff at the Office of Federal Student Aid. And so we've seen reports of calls going unanswered, glitches going unfixed, and disruptions in colleges' abilities to calculate their own financial aid offers. And so how can we expect colleges to deliver transparency if they themselves don't have the necessary information? At the end of the day, transparency in college costs is a wonderful goal, but increased transparency is not going to help families afford the cost of college once they understand the total cost. Addressing transparency is a tiny drop in the bucket compared to the larger issues that students are dealing with. And so I hope that we can have a productive discussion today about transparency. But we must also keep in mind that the way to achieve affordable education isn't just by making the net price easier to find on the school website. Democrats are committed to ensuring that students have access to safe and affordable higher education that works for everyone, not just the privileged few. Mr. Chairman, I look forward to our discussion today. I thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. Pursuant to Committee Rule 8C, all members who wish to insert written statements into the record may do so by submitting them to committee clerk electronically in Microsoft Word format by 5 p.m., 14 days after this hearing. And without objection, the hearing records will remain open for 14 days to allow such statements and such material noted during the hearing to be submitted for the official hearing record. I know that some of our colleagues who are not permanent members of the subcommittee may be joining us for this hearing today. I'd now like to turn to the introduction of our 4 distinguished witnesses. First witness is Dr. Andrew Gillen, a research fellow at the Cato Institute here in Washington, D.C. Second witness is Mr. Lee S. Wishing III, the Vice President of Student Recruitment and Chief Marketing Officer for Grove City College in Grove City, Pennsylvania. Third witness is Amy Laitinen. Okay, thank you, Amy. Senior Director of Higher Education for New America in Washington, D.C. Thank you, Amy. And Justin Drager, the Senior Vice President for Affordability at the Stratton Education Foundation in Washington, D.C. We thank the witnesses for being here today, and we look forward to your testimony. Pursuant to committee rules, I would ask each of you to limit your oral presentation to 3-minute summary of your written statement. As committee members have many questions for you, the clock will count down from 3 minutes. However, pursuant to Committee Rule 8D, committee practice, we will not cut off your testimony until you reach the 5-minute mark. I would also like to remind the witnesses to be aware of your responsibilities to provide accurate information to the subcommittee. I'd like to first recognize Mr. Drager for your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Chairman Owens, Ranking Member Adams, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the invitation to testify today. I'm Justin Drager, Senior Vice President for Affordability at Strata Education Foundation. At Strata, we are focused on connecting education with opportunity for more Americans, particularly those with the most standing in their way. Price transparency is a foundational part of affordability because it helps families make informed choices, budget realistically, and trust the system. And without it, we lose not only dollars, but dreams and talent and opportunity. Sadly, according to our research, most people have no idea what it actually costs to attend a community college or a 4-year in-state public university. In fact, again, with our research, most are overestimating that cost. And at the same time, most Americans, nearly 4 out of 5, believe college is unaffordable. And here's the kicker, the net price, and this is the price that families actually pay, has been flat or even declining in inflation-adjusted dollars for several years. But nobody would believe it because all they see are rising sticker prices, scary headlines, confusing jargon, and enrollment tactics that too often leave them in a fog of confusion. And that confusion has real consequences. First, cost perceptions and cost realities are the #1 reason people don't attend post-secondary education or they drop out. And two, price confusion and enrollment tactics erode public trust in post-secondary ed. Solving this problem will require more than messaging. If all we do is tell families that college is affordable, they won't believe us unless we also change the practices and the system that is undermining that trust. So what do families say they actually want? Well, according to our research, and across every group that we've interviewed in the last year, this includes high school students, college students, adult learners, and parents, 3 things rose to the top. They want one clear all-in number as early as possible, no surprise fees. 2, they want guarantees within reason that their price won't change while they're enrolled. And 3, they want one clear sense of return on their investment. They want to know whether the degree or credential that they're receiving will pay off in the end. And they want minimal amounts of loan debt. Colleges, for their part, they want the same thing, but they feel stuck in models that have been embedded in enrollment management for decades. Rising sticker prices to signal quality or balance ledgers or fill classrooms, and discounts to then recruit students. And some of that may make sense on paper, but it erodes public trust in the system. We can fix this if we prioritize clear numbers early, standardize plain language all in pricing, and fix incentives focused on simplification at every level of enrollment and financial aid. Students and families are not asking for miracles. They're asking all of us to work together at the federal, state, and institutional level, focused on honesty, predictability, and clarity, not complexity. Thank you for this opportunity, and I look forward to today's conversation.
Thank you. I'd now like to recognize Mr. Wishing for your testimony.
Chairman Owens, Ranking Member Adams, and distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify about unfunded discounting, a misleading tuition pricing practice widely used by colleges and universities. My name is Lee Wishing, and I am Vice President for Student Recruitment at Grove City College in Western Pennsylvania. Most universities without large endowments set their tuition sticker prices well above their actual costs, their break-even costs. This is done for 3 main reasons. First, a high sticker price can create an inflated perception of value. Second, it allows the school to offer large, impressive-looking scholarships to every student, making them feel valued and desired. Finally, and most importantly, this scheme dupes some students into unwittingly funding their classmates' scholarships. Let's use a simple example. A university sets its sticker price at $65,000, but its actual break-even cost to educate a student is only $35,000. Therefore, it can give every student a $30,000 scholarship without losing any money. But what happens to the student who receives just a $20,000 scholarship? They'll pay $45,000, which is $10,000 more than the school's break-even cost. This extra $10,000 can then be used to give a more desired student, perhaps one with a high SAT score or a special talent, a larger scholarship, say $40,000. Essentially, students who receive smaller scholarships are unknowingly subsidizing those who get larger ones in such a scheme. This practice puts students and families at a risk of overpayment and excessive debt. They may take on loans to pay for a portion of their classmates' education and could be burdened with that debt for years after graduation. Furthermore, many schools have a minimum GPA requirement to maintain these scholarships. If a student loses their scholarship, they may be faced to pay the full inflated sticker price or drop out of college altogether, sometimes with a large debt burden. My college, Grove City College, competes in the higher education marketplace without practicing unfunded discounting. We charge our break-even price of $35,290. Our scholarships are fully funded by our endowment, alumni, and friends. No student pays for another. We see firsthand how this practice is a sophisticated marketing scheme with an entire industry built around it, including third-party vendors who develop data models to determine scholarship awards. In summary, unfunded discounting is a marketing scheme that inflates tuition prices, distorts perception of value, and causes some students to unknowingly subsidize other students, often at great personal expense and debt that will take years to pay off. Thank you for your time and consideration of this important matter.
Thank you. I'd like to now recognize Ms. Laitinen. Please, Laitinen. Okay, thank you. Oh, okay, thank you. Yes, thank you.
Good morning, Chairman Owens, Ranking Member Adams, and distinguished members of the committee. My name is Amy Laitinen, and I'm the director of the Higher Education Program, which is at New America, which is a nonpartisan think tank. Bring my mic here. All right, how's this? Wonderful. Thank you for inviting me today to discuss what's at stake in ensuring that millions of students and their families have the information and support they need when making one of the most consequential, expensive, and as Mr. Owens said, confusing decisions of their lives, whether and where to go to college. And the first thing that families need to make that decision is pretty simple: clear, comparable, honest information about what college will really cost. But right now, too many colleges are hiding the ball. Our research found that a third of financial aid offers, which are supposed to show students what college will cost and how to pay for it, didn't include cost information. And colleges used 136 different terms for the exact same federal loan. And 24 of them didn't even use the word loan. When buying a car or a home, consumers get standardized disclosures. Students and families deserve the same for college, which is why Congress should support and pass the bipartisan, bicameral Understanding the True Cost of College Act. But price transparency alone isn't enough. Even when students know the college's price, too many still can't afford it. Rising costs have pushed too many to take on unmanageable debt, leave college, or never go in the first place. Pell Grants now cover only about a quarter of the full cost of attending a public university, which is the lowest share in decades. And some colleges are making it worse. As we heard before, more and more they're using their institutional aid not to support low-income students, but to attract wealthier, high-scoring students who will boost their rankings and their revenue. Our research found that between 2001 and 2017, selective public four-year universities spent $32 billion on students with no financial need. $32 billion that could have gone to help low and moderate income students. That's unconscionable. And colleges need to stop doing that. This behavior undermines the Pell Grant program and leaves the students who Congress has prioritized with bigger affordability gaps and more debt. In addition to stopping that behavior, we need more investments to restore the Pell Grant's purchasing power, reforms to ensure that states and institutional aid goes to students who need it the most, and a meaningful federal-state partnership to stabilize costs and keep them low. But even when students can pay for college, affordability isn't enough because it doesn't mean much if programs leave them drowning in debt or stuck in low-wage jobs. And that's why passing the bipartisan College Transparency Act and maintaining the Department of Education's financial value transparency rule is critical so that students can see which programs pay off and which don't before they enroll. Transparency is essential, but it's not a substitute for protection. Students and taxpayers need meaningful accountability, and Congress took a major step forward during reconciliation, including a do-no-harm standard to ensure that colleges don't leave students worse off than if they hadn't enrolled at all. But Congress needs to go further. It needs to include the risky undergraduate certificate programs and protect students from programs with unaffordable debt. And it needs to support the department as it implements and enforces both these new protections and existing protections like the gainful employment rule. But laws don't protect students on their own. They require people and resources, and right now the department needs both. The federal government spends over $130 billion a year in student aid. Students and taxpayers deserve a system that makes college costs clear, keeps education affordable, and holds institutions accountable for value. Thank you for including me in this really important conversation, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that. My last witness, Dr. Gillen.
Chairman Owens, Ranking Member Adams, and esteemed members of the committee, thank you for giving me the opportunity to testify on these important matters. My name is Andrew Gillen. I'm a research fellow at the Cato Institute, and I've been studying higher education for longer than I'd care to confess to. So today's topic on transparency in higher education is an excellent one. And higher education tends to have both high and uncertain pricing, which is a particularly brutal combination for students and parents. One promising policy that could help address these problems is price transparency. There's been momentum around 3 different price transparency initiatives in higher education. The first, which Amy alluded to, was eliminating confusing financial aid terminology. So making sure we're using the same words to describe Pell Grant student loans. This is a very low-hanging fruit. We should definitely do it. Number 2, net price transparency, which this body has already done some work on in mandating net price calculators. I think more work still remains to be done. But the third is really a state-level initiative at this point, and these are what we refer to as price guarantees that lock in a maximum price for a predetermined number of years, typically the length of the program, so 2 years for an associate degree, 4 years for a bachelor's degree. States like Ohio and North Carolina are already implementing some of these. In terms of the overall pros and cons of price transparency, my written testimony has a complete list, but I want to highlight a couple of the big ones in my limited time here. As an economist, I'm going to focus a bit on the economic rationales for price transparency, which include increases in market efficiency, more informed decision-making on the part of students and parents, reduced transactions costs, and a better competitive pressure on institutions, not only because the students and parents are more informed, but also because we would anticipate seeing less things like price discrimination and scholarship displacement with more transparent pricing. But I am trained as an economist, so I do tend to to emphasize the economic reasons, but I actually think the strongest argument for price transparency is the moral one, which is eliminating surprise bills. It really shocks the conscience when this happens in the healthcare setting, and we need to make sure it's not happening in the higher education setting as well. So what can we learn about transparency from other industries? My written testimony has some good information on both healthcare and the cement industry. Oddly enough. And so I'd encourage you to take a look at that if you're interested. In terms of the overall recommendations, my main conclusion is that the benefits of transparency almost certainly outweigh the costs of implementing it, and we should pass new legislation to do that. That legislation should standardize financial aid terminology, supplement the existing net price calculators with a universal one that facilitates comparisons across colleges, require a price guarantee for the typical length of the program, make compliance with these price transparencies a condition of Title IV participation, and then forbid things like price controls that could muddy the waters. I would also advocate maybe considering making this an add-on for states that don't already implement their own. So a state like Ohio or North Carolina that's already doing this, perhaps allow them to continue doing their version, but do require standardized terminology and formats so that it's machine readable and comparable. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to testify, and I look forward to answering any questions you have.
Thank you so much. Under Committee Rule 9, we'll now begin questioning under the 5-minute rule. I will recognize myself for the first 5 minutes. Mr. Wishing, first of all, very enlightening opening statement. And I just wanted to, your testimony, you described tuition discounting as, quote, best kept open secret. Is there anything you can add to what you've already kind of exposed or talked about so far? Again, for many of us, this might be the first time we're hearing these type of terms. So anything you want to add to your opening statement?
Sure, the best kept open secret. It really is, from my perspective, the seat that I sit in at a place that doesn't practice this. It's just remarkable to see how the whole industry knows this is happening. Everybody knows it. marketing firms that create the data models. I've been in conversations with college presidents, colleagues who've gone off to other institutions. In summary, sir, everybody knows. Everybody knows. The associations that colleges belong to. Everybody knows but the students and the parents. And we have a heck of a time cutting through that morass of misinformation to help students understand what's going on.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And Mr. Drager, in your testimony, you indicated that the impact of current college pricing system is not shared equally among students. Which students and families are hurt the most when colleges are not transparent, and how does this lack of transparency impact enrollment, persistence, and completion?
Three groups stand out when we looked at the numbers of students that suffer the most when they don't have a clear idea of what college is going to cost. First are low-income and first-generation students. They're the least likely to have family experience that helps them navigate a really complex system. The second are adult learners. They're debt-averse. They want to understand the ROI the most, and when they can't decipher what the degree or credential will help them and how it will pay off in the end, they're reluctant to enroll. And third are middle-income families who earn too much to qualify for the maximum need-based aid, but they don't make enough money to pay the sticker price. And when they confuse sticker and net, they don't have clarity and will delay or potentially not enroll. In terms of persistence, the numbers we have almost show that 9 out of 10 students who don't persist or who drop out of higher education cite perceptions of cost or real cost as the reason why. If you look at all of the other reasons that they come up with, they nearly every other reason is indirectly related to perceptions of cost or cost. So I would say the bottom line is when students don't understand the price, the most vulnerable ones are the ones who pay the highest cost, not just in dollars, but in lost opportunity.
Thank you. First of all, this is an extremely important conversation, and for many of us to understand some of what's happening behind the curtains is very, very enlightening, to say the least. So I'd like to now recognize my colleague from California, Mr. Takano.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Laitinen, you state in your testimony that transparency is the minimum protection that families need before committing to one of the most expensive decisions of a lifetime. And I couldn't agree more with that assertion. Ms. Laitinen, you also describe how the current gainful employment and the financial value transparency rules, well, can you describe how the current gainful employment and financial value transparency rules protect students?
Absolutely. Thanks for the question. And just to underscore, transparency is not a substitute for protection. And I will say both of these rules, the gainful employment rule and the financial value transparency rule, go as far as the Department of Education can go without congressional action. And I really applaud the department for going as far as it has gone. And H.R. 1 did do an accountability measure, but it really lacked some holes that the gainful employment rule keeps in place. So one of them is what I mentioned earlier, which are these really risky certificates that where we see a lot of concentrated, terrible outcomes for students. And then we see a lot of programs where you have students are drowning in debt that they can't pay back. H.R. 1 took a good step, and it has a mandatory earnings provision, but it doesn't include that debt piece, and it has this whole entire loophole for these certificates. But gainful employment is the backstop to that because it will protect students against those programs. But the problem is, it's a rule, and we all know regulations come and regulations go. And I think it would be better if this were codified in law, but until and unless it is, it needs to stay. And I think that Congress needs to use its congressional oversight authority to make sure that the rule is enforced, that the rule is being implemented, and that the data that are coming out of the rule are shared with the public. And the same thing is happening with the financial value transparency rule, which is, we're talking about transparency of price. We need transparency of price. For particular programs, we need transparency of outcomes, and this is called FVT, financial value transparency. It is I think it's the most impressive step the Department of Education, the federal government, has taken so far in terms of transparency. And I would also encourage the department, not the department, I would encourage Congress to encourage the department to both implement the financial value transparency rule and make sure that those data come out. Because right now, sorry to get a little bit wonky, the department has just finished 2 rounds of collecting the data. So we could publish those now and have information that students could use today, or as soon as they publish it, to make these decisions. And I will say that the gainful employment rule is on the docket right now. The Department of Education is reconsidering it during an upcoming negotiated rulemaking session, and colleges are already lining up and writing in their comments saying, ooh, let's weaken that rule, let's get rid of that rule. And what that's going to mean is it's not just going to hurt the students who are in those programs today, the certificate programs or the unmanageable debt, the certificate programs that I talked about. It means there's going to be an incentive for colleges to create more and more and more of those programs because they are not subject to that accountability, and that's really dangerous for students.
To summarize, transparency is important. It's a minimum basis. I think we as Republicans and Democrats can agree on that point. But I think we don't necessarily see eye to eye on the equal, or if not more importance, placed on gainful employment and the financial value transparency rules. So I think I would hope that the 2 sides can come together and see how all these can work together to protect both the taxpayer and the student. Now, I agree with my colleagues that transparency in college pricing is a serious issue, but there are a number of factors that make the cost of college rise. The Republican reconciliation package massively cut foundational federal health care and nutrition programs and have strapped states for resources as they scramble to cover those costs. They've pushed these costs onto the states. How will the reduction in Medicaid and SNAP impact the cost of public education and the funding for state financial aid?
It's going to be huge. I mean, the first thing that states do when they're facing budget cuts is they cut higher education. And they cut higher education because they can raise money for it. But the raising money for it is raising tuition, which means the budgets are being balanced on the backs of students, often in the forms of debt. These are going to be massive holes in state budgets with the cuts to Medicaid and SNAP, and it's going to have a really big impact on student affordability.
Thank you so much for that. Thank you. Are you back?
Thank you. I'd like now to recognize the chairman of the full committee, Chairman Walbert.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to the panel for being here. And I'm delighted in my conversations with the Secretary of Education that some of this is actually going to be happening, including in FAFSA, which will be rolling out on time. So thank you for being here. Mr. Wishing, your school, like Hillsdale College in my district, has made a concerted effort and a decision to underwrite its own college costs and not take federal funding. And so it's interesting to have you here speaking about this issue and talking about the transparency that you show to your incoming students. In your testimony, you mentioned that, and I quote, and it's a shocking quote, the very first transaction a student has with most Christian colleges is based on deception, end quote. Could you elaborate on this point, including whether this deception is exclusive to private faith-based institutions or applicable more broadly to public and other types of institutions?
Thank you for the question, sir. In some ways, I feel like apologizing for using the word a deception because it is a very strong word. But
we like transparency.
Yeah, I can't think of a better word. It is deceptive. Students, it's deceptive in that, so Grove City, Hillsdale, we compete for pretty high achieving students. And these students are the big winners in this game at the expense of maybe the lower achieving students. The high achieving students think that they're getting a huge, wonderful scholarship. What I've seen A $30,000 scholarship, an institution will have maybe 10% money in that. So it's greatly over, the actual value is greatly overstated. So it's creating this perception, grandiose perception that the student is greatly desired. The students that score lower or achieve at a lower rate, they too get a scholarship. It's like everybody gets a trophy. Some students get a big trophy, and the students that get a smaller trophy, they end up paying for the bigger trophies. It's staggering. Everybody does it. I shouldn't say everybody does it, not everybody, but it's widely practiced.
But it is across the board.
Excuse me?
It is across the board.
I see it every day of my working life.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. Dr. Gillen, an eye-opening expose by the Wall Street Journal in 2023 found that the public flagship universities have, and I quote, been on an unfettered spending spree and have passed the bill along to students, unquote. Oftentimes, public institutions are one of the loudest voices against post-secondary education reform, arguing that state funding fluctuations make transparency with students impossible while ignoring their institutional spending habits. Do you agree with the premise that state funding has declined, and does the fact that an institution receives state funding mean that it can't be honest with students and families?
So I do disagree with the premise that state funding has been on a long downward trajectory. This is often called state disinvestment. A couple months ago, we actually put out a report that documented the last 4.5 decades of state funding for higher education. And when you look at the trend line, it's actually up. So states have been increasing funding over time by about $56 per student per year. Now, during recessions, that there is a downward trend, but then it quickly increases later. So I actually counted it up last night. We've now had 12 years of higher state funding than the year before in a row for 12 years now. And that kind of realization has not soaked through to the conventional wisdom yet.
Thank you. Quickly, my final seconds here. Mr. Drager, you indicate the schools set high sticker price to signal high quality and prestige. In Strata's research, how do students and families react when they learn these scholarships are nothing more than a marketing ploy?
Initially, they react with delight that they're receiving a scholarship. Ultimately, down the line, it works against the school's interest. I might just frame this slightly differently. I don't think schools are engaging in deceptive practices. I think they're engaging in practices that ultimately students and families come to see as deceptive. And I think there is an important distinction. Ultimately, I think there are many schools that would like off-ramps to these practices. Collectively, I think we can get there.
Thank you. I yield my time.
Thank you. I'd like now to recognize my colleague from New Jersey, Mr. Nokoroff.
Thank you, Chairman, very much for yielding and especially for holding this hearing. And to Chairman Wahlberg, this is an incredibly important question to virtually every family in the United States. The first question is, what do you want to do when you grow up? Which turns into, whether it's 9th, 10th, 11th grade, are you going to college? With the assumption is that's the first and best and only answer in so many ways. Do you want to go to college? Well, the fact of the matter is, for every parent having that discussion with their child is, do you want to go to college? Do you want to serve your nation and go into the military? Or do you want to go to a trade school? Because at the end of the day, whether it's college, military, it's what is your career? What is going to be your job? Student loans, I say it all the time, is one of the greatest things we ever done and one of the worst things we've ever done. Because for parents who care so much about their children, they want to do what's right by them. To pay $80,000 to go to college for 1 year. First of all, let's back up. We talk about, like, every child knows, I want to go to college, and this is what I want to do. I would love to see the statistics of asking that child what job or career that they're going for and where do they end up. If we hit 50-50, I would be surprised. And this is, the reason I'm bringing this up is having that discussion with the parents and the child of what the true costs are is incredibly important. Nobody's mentioned community college. Is this what I want to do? Because that is the most affordable, accessible for any child. And then move into a 4-year and go on. But the idea that so often they want to chase that picture that they see, it's a great sports team, and listen, we just came off a great weekend of watching sports for college football. And how many children pick those schools simply because of the academic program or the sports programs? So true cost is such a relevant issue. Earlier in your testimony, you talked about the net cost. When you just talked about the funding for higher education, you said it went up. Of course it does. Everybody raises it. But what is the true cost against inflation? That would absolutely change it. So A, having the right information, calling it the right thing, that terminology is so important. We can do this, and I am very much focused on that. The terminology and the basic costs for college. You talked about repeatedly. You can buy the Chevy or you can buy the Cadillac. And we need to address those issues to go through the school. And the idea of saying there should be a cost guarantee, if it's 2-year college, your cost there. So we're having a great discussion for something that ends up being the biggest decision in many people's life, other than getting married and having children. This is so important that we consider what takes place at the time of these decisions, because it impacts the parents who might have to help the child, and it certainly is going to impact that child making that decision. So, transparency. Ms. Laitinen, talk to me about when this child and this parent are making a decision, what goes into making that decision that impacts? Are they actually looking like, gee, to go there, it's going to cost me $500,000 to send you there for something that you may or may not do? When we're talking about transparency and the terminology, also the decision-making, what goes into that in the studies that you've been a part of? How do the parents and child actually make that decision?
Ideally, they should be making that decision with really good information and really good, complete, and honest data. And right now, they're not. And just to be a little bit crude about it, it's garbage in, garbage out in terms of if you have really misleading information that is on these financial aid offers. In our research, we have found, in addition to some of the issues that I mentioned at the top, there are colleges that will list loans, like Parent Plus loans, and put them as if they are gifts, as if they are awards that they do not have to pay back. One of my favorite and horrible examples is there's a college, there was a letter that at the very bottom of it, it had all of the grants and loans and things, and at the very bottom of it said, your out-of-pocket cost is $0, which is amazing. That's great. I don't have to pay anything to go to college. But in that letter, Parent Plus loans of $27,000 were listed. Student loans were listed, but they were like P+. Who knows what P+ is? Do you know what P? Well, you know what P+ is. Everybody in this committee knows what P+ is, but most people don't know what that is. And that's because the information is, I will disagree with my colleague Justin here a little bit about whether or not it's intentionally deceptive. I think for some colleges it's not, and I think for some colleges it is, because this tool is both helping students try to understand the cost of college, but it's a marketing tool for schools to recruit students.
I yield back. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Now I'd like to recognize my colleague from North Carolina, Mr. Harris.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all on the panel. This is an extremely eye-opening hearing, and I'm very grateful for all of your expertise and what you're sharing. Mr. Wishing, I'm concerned that federal policies over the past several decades have really helped to drive up college costs, and I think you can tell by the questioning that in your testimony, many were captivated as you discussed the concept of unfunded discounting, where college offers scholarships to a student based on an artificially high fake price. And the scholarship makes it seem like the student's getting a huge discount, but really it's a discount off a number much higher than it needed to be. So how does the federal loan system perpetuate the idea of unfunded discounting?
Well, I may not be the best person to answer that because we don't take federal loans, but from my competitive perspective, what I see is, you know, money is fungible. So if you think about a school that may get, let's even like Pell Grants, sir. If a school gets $5 million a year worth of Pell Grants, that's worth $100 million in an endowment coming out of Washington, D.C. So that's like, we have to compete against that. So Grove City would have to have $100 million of its endowment just to compete with the Pell Grant stream. So anyway, it puts a lot of money into the system that can kind of slosh around, be used to award for this, award for that, but it kind of, it gives a base of funding to schools. If that were taken away, boom, that, you know, I think you'd see a lot more pencil sharpening at schools. I think they'd offer a better value. I hope that's a good answer, but again, we don't participate in any of that, so I may not be the best person to answer.
Well, but I think you offer a great perspective from the outside looking in at how that system could perpetuate the whole idea. In fact, I'll follow up that with a question as well for you. What type of student benefits from the unfunded discounting system, and what type of student is taken advantage of in that?
Well, as I said earlier, I think the student that benefits is the high-achieving student. That student unwittingly is, in the unfunded discounting scheme, is getting a scholarship being funded most likely by a classmate, maybe his or her roommate. And the loser in this is the roommate that may be a B student, and she doesn't know that she's paying for her maybe $10,000 a year, $15,000 a year for her roommate's scholarship. She may be borrowing that money, racking up $40, $50, or $1,000 or more in debt and graduating with that, and then having to spend the next 10, 15, 20 years paying off her roommate's scholarship that she unwittingly paid for. And sadly, you know, the big winners in all of this, not just the high-achieving student, but the institution. Students are funding institutional scholarship programs. They're the big winners.
Well, in the Working Families Tax Cut bill that was just signed into law by President Trump, Republicans set limits on the amount that students can borrow. How would you think loan limits play a role in reducing college costs?
Well, I do think that would help. I think it would, the way that it would help, it would force the consumer to think more about the value of what the parents are paying for, the students are paying for. I think it would force more thinking about the value of what they're doing.
Okay. I will ask you something else in your testimony, Mr. Wishing. You noted the challenging the industry is difficult when it comes to reforms that would benefit students and families. And you also indicate that the interest groups representing colleges and universities play a significant role in perpetuating the current dysfunctional pricing system. I'd really love for you just to take a moment in the last 20 seconds to discuss these challenges, including the opposition you face from the industry when pushing reforms that would improve transparency in college shopping.
I do think associations could help. Some of the associations that schools belong to require a transparency or an ethical, sign off on an ethical statement to be transparent with students about such things. I've challenged one organization about that. I encouraged them, well, I won't go too deep into that, but it was a pretty lengthy back and forth process. And in the end, the board of that organization said they really couldn't change because it would be detrimental to the recruitment philosophies and detrimental to their enrollment efforts of their members.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you so much, appreciate that. I'd now like to recognize the ranking member from North Carolina, Ms. Adams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank again the witnesses for being here. When students sign up for college, they shouldn't be left guessing how much aid they'll get, guessing whether tuition will jump from one year to the next, guessing if they'll be able to stay enrolled at all. But the biggest challenge, I think, for students is covering the gap between the money, the aid that they receive from the institutions and what they're able to pay. I spent 40 years teaching as a college professor, and so I do understand some of this. But I know that that kind of uncertainty pushes students to the breaking point. Some take on loans that they can't repay, others drop out, not because they couldn't do the work, but because they couldn't make the math work. Now, let's put the numbers in perspective. The maximum Pell Grant today is $7,395. And in most states, including North Carolina, where tuition and fees at a community college average just about $2,300, that's more than enough to cover tuition. But what that tells us is simple. Community colleges are doing a lot with very little. They're providing a rigorous post-secondary education at a fraction of the cost of four-year institutions, but they need more federal support to keep doing more while staying affordable. And yet, despite these low tuition costs, about 12% of community college students nationwide are still taking out student loans. And that tells us affordability isn't just about tuition. It's about housing. It's about food and transportation. It's about childcare and the full cost of attendance. So while today's hearing is about transparency, we can't stop there. Students don't just need price tags. They need predictability. They need affordability, and they need Congress to stand up for them and not pull the rug out with cuts to Pell and federal aid. And let me just turn to our witness, Ms. Laitinen. Many students are concerned that during their time in college, their aid and therefore their cost of attendance can change dramatically. You've written about price guarantees versus affordability guarantees. So could you answer, what is a price guarantee? And why is it different from an affordability guarantee? And what considerations should Congress keep in mind if we explore an affordability guarantee?
Thank you so much for the question. So I think price guarantees are trying to get at this question that you talked about, which is predictability. Higher ed is a super weird product, and that you buy it multiple times. It's not like you just buy it once and you're paying, you sort of put it on layaway and you're paying the same price over time. The cost can dramatically change from year to year. And we need to stop that. We need to make sure that those prices are predictable. And I think that's what the price guarantee is trying to do. And so I understand that. I think it's absolutely worth exploring. I think there is some caution in what we have seen in certain states so far, which is in some cases, states have frozen the tuition for a certain group of students only to really raise tuition for the other students, or including out-of-state students. And it's not just raising tuition for them, it's recruiting more of them so the schools can get more money. So we have to make sure as we're designing a program like that, that we're not shifting costs onto students. Okay. But either way, that's not an affordability guarantee. And students need to make sure that they can afford to go to college.
Thank you. In July, Congress passed H.R. 1, which cut federal student aid and safety net programs, and students tell me that they need more aid, not less. And while transparency is important, what good is transparency if we're just telling students they can't afford their dream? So, Ms. Laitinen, as these student aid cuts take effect in 2026, what should students and families be aware of when making decisions about how to pay for college, from tuition to indirect costs, and what should we know about how H.R. 1 will affect colleges' abilities to address rising costs?
I mean, I think they need to know that it's probably going to be more expensive for some students, and that it's going to be harder for low-income students to achieve some of the things that they've been wanting to achieve. And I think we're going to see in certain places, like for medical education, for example, I think it's going to be harder for students who don't come from wealthy families to be able to afford to go to medical school and become doctors.
Thank you. Let me move on quickly. So given the tuition at community colleges is often below the maximum Pell, but students are still borrowing at significant rates. So how should Congress better support community colleges so that they can continue offering affordable, high-quality education while addressing the full cost of attendance? I've got about 3 seconds.
Investment.
Okay. All right, thank you. I'm investing as a grandmother with two granddaughters in college right now. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I yield back.
Now, that was an impressive answer. Thank you so much. I'd like to recognize my colleague from Florida, Mr. Fine.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I approach this hearing today with a heavy heart. I chaired higher education in Florida for 2 years when I was in the legislature, and frankly, given what we've seen over the last week, I believe that higher education is fundamentally broken. You know, when I hear professors making the kinds of comments that have been made from departments that I don't even know why they exist, like queer studies, I wonder, frankly, if we shouldn't be having this debate at all because the federal government should be exiting the higher education system and say, you guys are on your own, good luck, make it work, but it's time for the taxpayer to exit the system altogether. And that's something that I will be thinking about myself in the coming days. I don't know that the system is too irreparably broken for us to fix it. But, you know, before I was in politics, I actually worked in the hospitality business and helped pioneer the idea of yield management, which is getting different people to pay different amounts for the same product. Particularly think of hotel rates. How do you manage hotel prices and airline prices? Not necessarily to discriminate against two identical customers, but based on different times and different demand cycles in the purchasing process. And it's horrifying to me, frankly, to hear that what hotels use to decide what they're going to price your vacation at or your airplane ticket at is being used to decide whether kids can go to college or not. That is incredibly disturbing. So my question is for Mr. Wishing. In your testimony, you described the enrollment management industry, which involves schools hiring consultants, frankly, like what I used to do. I had no idea that universities did this, who use sophisticated data modeling to pinpoint the exact price that an institution needs to charge to an individual student. How prevalent are these consultants in higher education? How much money are these people getting paid to do this? And how do they influence the prices that are charged to students and their families?
Well, they're out there. There are big name companies in the higher ed space.
Is that all they do? Like this is their business?
Well,
yield management for
Well,
colleges?
there can be a big component of the business. The ones that I'm aware of, it's a big component of their business. I've been to I was at a summit, so to speak, here in D.C. and saw one of these companies demonstrate the model. The ethical implications of these things, to see them demonstrated, are jaw-dropping. And to be in a room when this happens and other members of the industry there, like on my side of the table, see it happen, unaffected by what we just saw, is staggering. And I think the reason that people are unaffected by this is that it's just the air that higher ed breathes. Of course, everybody does this. Like in the private world, everybody does it in the hotel world. I think a big problem, frankly, is the nonprofit status. And everybody might be horrified that I'm saying this, but the nonprofit status that higher institutions of education have, because we're supposed to serve the public good, and families and students assume that's what we're doing. But behind the curtain, there are people pulling all kinds of levers that don't work for the public good.
No, I appreciate that. Look, one of the biggest public policy problems we have today is the whole idea of nonprofit. It's a branding issue. People hear something as nonprofit, they assume like struggling people that are, starving to death, that are working for the nobility of the enterprise, because it's a nonprofit enterprise. All a nonprofit institution means is that there are no profits distributed to shareholders. They get distributed in the form of salaries. And look at what some of these people actually get paid. Do any of you have any examples of these firms and what they charge, like specific, just for the benefit of the committee? You need to name names, but you're aware of a university charging group X. I'll let anybody answer. I'm sort of horrified that this business even exists.
Oddly enough, a couple years ago, I was on a plane with a university president, and she was talking about their enrollment management company, and they were talking about saving $300,000. Not, so that wasn't like the total cost, that was just the.
That's what they cut off their contract.
Yeah, so if they switched to a different group, they would be
So-
paying $300,000.
so I'd close
that means
with
they were
this.
paying much higher than that.
I got 10 seconds left. Imagine how competitive some of our college institutions are right now. Imagine if they get into the world where they're basically auctioning off slots to those who can pay the highest price. That is where this ends up, and that's not a good thing for anybody. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you. I'd like to now recognize my colleague from Oregon, Ms. Bonamici.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member, and thank you to the witnesses. This is an important conversation and something I've cared about since I joined this committee years ago, in large part because of my personal experience that informed my understanding that not everybody's on the same path. I didn't go to college after high school. I was working. That's what worked for me at the time. So years later, I started first community college, then law school. And I did that all on my own with a combination of grants, loans, work study. Now, higher education was a lot less expensive at the time, but had I not had that support, I didn't have a dorm or a meal plan, housing costs, those all factored into the decision. And then also as a parent of two children who are highly educated, I went through the process as a parent and saw the frenzy of the college admissions cycle and how that it became commercialized and how the very misleading rankings oftentimes put into students' minds that they have to go to one of these big name colleges to be successful, not understanding that there are plenty of other colleges that either might be less affordable, and then also not getting accurate information about some of the schools and their need-blind admissions policies. So there's a lot of misinformation out there that I think distorts the college admissions process in general. But it has been a priority of mine to open the doors of opportunity for anyone who chooses college. So I want to start with you, Ms. Layton. And in your testimony, you talked about the urgency of a federal data system. So we have those more complete information about outcomes across colleges. I want to insert that I have said for years on this committee and in education discussions that I think it's wrong to gauge students and graduates based on their income. If someone graduates and goes into public service or starts a nonprofit or is an entrepreneur, they might not have a high salary. That doesn't mean they didn't get a good education. But tell me a little bit about what the Bipartisan College Transparency Act would do. Why is it important legislation for students and prospective students?
Well, thank you for the question, and thank you for being a sponsor of that legislation. And we got it through the House in 2022.
Right, we did.
And I hope we can get the ball over the finish line.
Very bipartisan.
Soon, because right now there's a lot of questions about, is college worth it, right? I mean, that's a lot of what we're talking about. There is both like, can you pay for it? Can you afford it? And then what are you going to get out of it? And right now, students and families are making a lot of these decisions without being able to answer that question. And we know that on average, college is absolutely worth it. But students don't go to average colleges. They go to particular colleges and particular programs, and they pay particular prices. But right now, they're really in the dark when they're trying to figure out, how's a student like me going to succeed or not succeed in a school like this or a program like this? And the College Transparency Act would really fill in some important gaps in our information systems so that we can tell students, not just those who get federal financial aid, but those who get GI Bill benefits, those who get tax credits, those who want to see themselves in the transparency tools that the Department of Education uses, including the college scorecard, which I don't remember if we've talked about it, but it's certainly in the written testimony.
It's pretty important to have that standardized information. But also, Ms. Layton, the National Center for Education Statistics, NCES, they play a pretty essential role in getting data about college outcomes collected, analyzed, disseminated. So what's at stake with that data if the Trump administration continues to defund NCES and other education research like the IES, Institute of Education Sciences?
I mean, there's a really big disconnect between the conversation we're having today about the need for transparency, the need to make sure that things are standardized, the need to have better information that is presented honestly to students. And the Department of Education has been decimated, and particularly the Institute for Education Sciences and National Center for Education Statistics. We're talking about the college scorecard. Who does the college scorecard?
Exactly.
People at NCES, and they're
Exactly.
gone.
Well, and you mentioned the cuts to staff across the department. The Office of Federal Student Aid, for example, it's going to significantly disrupt the ability of students to access financial aid and the information they need. And also what I call it the big ugly bill, because I don't think it's beautiful at all, that cuts billions of dollars in federal funding for student financial aid. And as many of you mentioned, the transparency alone is not enough to solve the problem. Mr. Drager, you mentioned first-generation students. Programs like TRIO and Gear Up, which the administration proposed eliminating, it looks like we're going to at least save some of that. Those are really critical programs to get information to students. I talked to a high school student who didn't know he could go to college until he talked to somebody from TRIO. So even if students have that clear understanding, we need to invest and have those programs like Work Study, Pell Grants. Work Study was a great program. Why aren't we boosting that funding to make college, open up those doors of opportunity so everyone who chooses college can get through and complete their degree without a tremendous amount of debt? And I'm out of time and I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I'd like to now recognize my colleague from California, Ms. Kiley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm looking at a chart from the Bureau of Labor Statistics that shows that since 2000, the cost of basic consumer goods, a lot of them anyway, has significantly declined. The cost of TVs has gone down 97.9%. Cost of software is down 72.4%. Cost of toys is down 73.5%. But then you look at the cost of college tuition, and it's an entirely different story, up 184.7%. And relatedly, the cost of college textbooks is up 154.1%. So, Dr. Gillen, how do we explain this divergence where we see some costs when it comes to consumer goods coming down because of innovation and the like, but then the cost of college continues to soar?
Yeah, that's a great question, and that's been a topic of intense study for a lot of people for a lot of time. The best explanation I can give you right now is that it's a difference between what we call search goods, experience goods, and credence goods. And so search goods are things like cereal or clothing, like you know what you're getting before you even make the purchase. Experience good is something like a restaurant meal where you don't know if it's going to be good before you eat it, but after you eat it, you can tell if it was good. A credence good is different. Like even after you've purchased it, you don't know if it was a good purchase or not. And so credence goods tend to have a couple characteristics. One, no agreed measures of quality. Like we don't know what distinguishes a good college from a bad college. There's no secondary market. And you don't know the value for it until long after you've made the purchase. So those three characteristics all credence goods have. But then you combine a couple other characteristics of higher education. Most students will typically only interact with a couple of colleges over their lifetime, so they can't even compare different colleges to different colleges. And then the students also participate in the provision of the good. So like if you as a student show up to campus and you just don't do anything, you're not going to learn anything. And so these things make higher education, even among the most difficult category of goods for normal economics to work its magic, make it really difficult. And so what we end up with is an unfortunate what we call the Bowen's revenue theory of costs, which is basically the college, since you can't observe quality, they compete to be the highest prestige or the highest reputation. And so they're all trying to be the best they can, which sounds great. But to do that, they need a lot of money. And so they're going to raise as much money as they can. They're going to spend everything they raise. And when you put all that together, you're going to see ever upward trend of spending in higher education. And that is fundamentally what is explaining why that line for higher ed looks so different than the line for something like TVs.
Interesting. So how does this compare for public versus private institutions? Obviously, even private institutions are reliant a lot on government subsidies, but like in my state, California, since 2000, tuition in the CSU system has gone up 350%. Tuition in the University of California UC system has gone up 400%, so even worse than the average across the country. What explains that extraordinary rise in college costs in the public sector?
Yeah, so the publics are an interesting case because they are also subject to a lot of political pressure from their state governments. And so state governments that are are kind of lenient will let them increase prices a lot more than other states. So a state like Florida doesn't let their colleges increase prices that much. A state like California seems like it's letting them do it.
Interesting. And I'd invite you to weigh in on this question as well, Ms. Laitinen, and if you'd like either of those.
The college cost, the price going up?
Yeah, and if there's anything we can do specifically when it comes to the public university system to try to get costs under control there.
Well, I think one of the things that we've been talking about is that the line that you're talking about, that isn't actually what the students are going to pay, and so it's really confusing. So we see the tuition going up, but as we talked about today, we have a lot of discounting where you have this high sticker price, but students aren't actually paying that price, and so we actually really need much more transparency about what it is that students are actually paying, not just this maximum sticker price they're putting up there to try to see, to the gentleman's point earlier around sort of predictive pricing, how many students can you sort of squeeze as much money out of to get them as close to the top as possible? But students are falling down all the way on the continuum, and we just need more transparency about what they're actually paying.
Yeah, I think that's a big part of the solution. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for bringing us together for this hearing. I yield back.
Thank you. I'd like to recognize my colleague from Georgia, Ms. Macbeth.
Thank you, Chairman Owens and Ranking Member Adams, and thank you to our witnesses today. I have read your testimonies. It's abundantly clear that our current higher education system is not working for the American people the way that it should be. That's the reason why we're having this hearing. It's not working for families who too often end up paying more than they thought they would ever have to pay. It's not working for the millions of students who are being forced to take out loans at predatory interest rates and have no degree or credentials to show for it at all. It's also not working for our employers who are in desperate need of workers with the specific skills necessary to fill the in-demand sectors of our economy. I'm talking to those employers all the time in my district. The status quo, well, it works well for some, but it leaves many people who are meant to be supported by education, Americans who are trying to get the skills that they need to provide a decent life for themselves and for their families, but they simply can't afford it. Instead of opening doors to opportunity for all, we have a system that puts far too many Americans in insurmountable debt at a time when most good-paying jobs in this country require a degree or some kind of credential. The reality for most Americans is that the only way that they can afford that credential or degree is to rely on student aid or take out a loan. People are told every day that one of the best ways that they can ever get ahead is to get an education, get a good college education, but instead of being rewarded with a better job and empowered with improved quality of life, too many are sentenced to a lifetime of debt for following the path that was laid out for them, obtaining the skills necessary to be gainfully employed and fill the workforce shortages that we see in all of our districts, all of my colleagues. We all agree that the current system is too expensive and that it isn't getting students where they need to and where they want to go. But the recent actions that are taken by my Republican colleagues will only make a bad situation worse. Cutting student aid for low-income students and families without getting at the root cause of the drastic increase in the cost of higher education will only further cement bad parts of a system that we're all here today trying to seek to improve. Prices continue to rise for students and families, and the majority is only adding to that burden by cutting programs that provide some level of protection from those increased prices. From Pell to work study to the federal supplemental emergency opportunity grant, Republicans and President Trump are unfortunately making education more and more expensive for working Americans by weakening and defunding the programs that they rely on to pay for schooling. At a time when Americans feel like that they are being taken advantage of, and this is something that I hear every day from my constituents, when there are so many people who have done everything right and have nothing to show for it, we should be committing ourselves to doing more to help them afford the skills that they need to be successful, not doing less. Ms. Laitinen, in your testimony, you did mention that tuition and fees have nearly doubled in price over the last 3 decades. Can you use what little time we have left to talk about why that is and what Congress can do not only to help those families deal with the rising costs and prices, but also to kind of rein in the overall costs of higher education?
Thanks for the question. It's a complicated one, and it really depends on which sector of education you're talking about. So if we're talking about public education, for example, state budgets are a really important part
Let's
of that.
talk about public education.
So let's talk about public education. I'm a community college graduate. We don't see as much investment by the states in some of the colleges as we should, but also I think the federal government has played a role in letting states off the hook, because states, as I mentioned earlier, when they are facing budget cuts, they decide, ooh, you know what? Instead of cutting K-12 education, let's cut higher ed education because they can increase tuition for students. And then what pays for that increased tuition? Federal student loans in the form of debt. So we have, the states backing out and sort of shoveling out money, and the feds are sort of shoveling the money in, but they're not, those aren't actually real investments in terms of debt. Those are still things that people have to pay back. We need to make sure that whatever federal investments are being made are not then being used by states to sort of back out. We need to have a federal-state partnership that helps to stabilize those costs and to make sure that both students have what they need in terms of aid for tuition and for living costs, but also that schools have what they need to help get students to and through college so that they're succeeding.
Well, thank you for that. So what it sounds like you're saying is a stronger collaboration, really to help undergird our students. I've spent a lot of time during our recess going to all of the Georgia institutions, talking with the presidents there, and I've heard pretty much the same thing. And so thank you for your testimonies, thank you for your witness, and I yield.
Thank you. I'd like now to recognize my colleague from Wisconsin, Mr. Kaufman.
Thank you. I don't know whether you've covered this already, but I'll let each one of you just kind of rattle off. What percentage of kids going to a four-year college should we have as opposed to the number who are going there now? And we'll start with Mr. Drager and just work our way across.
I don't mean to skirt the issue, but as many as want to.
I think, I don't know if that's, I think the market could determine that, sir, frankly. I think if
Well, right now, we're clearly subsidizing the idea that more people should go to college. And we hire at no small expense guidance counselors to advise people what they should do. Of all the people going to a four-year college right now, or say matriculating when they're hoping to get a degree, what percent should be applying to a four-year institution, and what percent should be looking to do something else?
I have no idea. The market is so distorted. I have no idea, sir.
I'm just going to copy what my colleague Justin Drager said. I think as many as want to, as many people who think that college is going to give them the opportunity and the economic mobility that they need to go to when they go through.
Well, what if they're being lied to? That's why I'm asking you the question.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's part of the whole point of this conversation is that we need to have transparency not just around costs, but about whether or not it's going to pay off.
Nobody will say. Why don't we ask the guy in the end here?
So the Department of Labor does actually do studies looking at the educational requirements for jobs. Okay. And so if you look at that, I want to say it's about 18% of jobs would require a bachelor's degree, and between 5 and 10% would require a graduate degree. You compare that with how many students actually have one. I think it's about 24% have a bachelor's degree and about 14% have a graduate degree. So putting it all together, we've got about 10% more people going to college than the Department of Labor estimates actually need those
Oh my
credentials.
goodness, that's kind of a sad state of affairs.
And that's 10 percentage points, not 10% more. Sorry, misspoke.
Yeah. Do you guys have off the top of your head, can anyone tell me in certain occupations how many people have a degree. Like we fly out here every week, you look at the flight attendants, say what percentage of flight attendants have a college degree? Or the other night I was shopping late at the grocery store and the gal behind the counter checking me out had a master's degree. She was freely saying she didn't really get a lot of value out of her master's degree, but she was happy with her job. Do you guys have any anecdotes of jobs that normally you don't think you need a bachelor's degree for, and the percentage of people doing them that have a bachelor's degree?
So, Mr. Gottman, I've been in a couple hearings with you, and I agree that one of the studies that we've done at Strada Education Foundation is the number of people who have pursued a certain degree or credential that wasn't required for the meaningful work that they ultimately pursued. This does happen.
It does happen. It happens all the time. It's the norm, but go ahead.
However, sir, I think where I was going is the answer to this question probably isn't from the supply side or the government trying to figure out exactly where the market is headed from year to year, but more, how do we provide meaningful outcome data that is helpful to students early on? And from our research, what we're seeing is, besides price clarity, what they want is very clear return on investment information about where does this degree or credential lead, what are the earnings, and what can I expect to receive on the other side to help them make meaningful decisions.
Okay. I'm trying to think what the number. I toured Walmart warehouse the other day, and their truck drivers, I can't remember whether they're making 110 or 140 grand a year. I'll have to call the lobbyist and find out. But they do that when they're 21 years old. What percentage of college graduates are making 110 grand a year, four-year graduates? Does anybody know?
Very small.
Very small. In other words, if we just were concerned about finances, the vast majority would be better off. And it's a tough job. I'm not saying most people could do it, but we'd be better off driving truck at Walmart. Probably in most cases something more useful to society as well. I'll give you one more quick question on my way out here. Well, okay, we'll leave that be.
Time has expired. Thank you so much. I'd like to recognize my colleague from California, Mr. DeSaulnier.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for having this hearing. It's really important, and thank you for all the witnesses. Yesterday, there was a national story in the New York Times, and I think the title was long-term unemployed, biggest cohort now is college graduates. And it just reminded me of, it wasn't that long ago, as a member from California, when I was in the legislature, everybody was talking about the knowledge-based economy, and everybody needed to not only have a bachelor's degree, but a graduate degree. And I remember having a conversation when I was the chair of the Labor Committee in the State Senate with the chair of the Higher Education Committee, and we were looking at how what used to be in the 50s and 60s in California, one of the great career tech infrastructure programs with the community colleges and with the Department of Corrections, but it had been neglected for years, and we focused on more to higher education. So this conversation, I think, is really important. And things that Mr. Norcross said, just remembering how we had to rebuild career tech and going to lots of high schools and community colleges in California. So we get carried away sometimes with the marketing, and particularly for disadvantaged communities, it's a challenge. So, Ms. Layton, I want to talk about Pell Grants. I've spent a lot of time on Pell Grants here, trying to make them based on merit and considering the demands on all of the people who should be in higher education, who choose it and have a career path. But for disadvantaged people sitting at places like Stanford, the University of California system, and kids can't get enough to eat or couldn't get housing. So we tried to make Pell Grants based on merit, but also based on need, so that the public would get the benefit of having really talented people get their degrees. So could you talk a little bit about how some of the changes we've made in the last few months make it more difficult to get people of merit who do have potential for really beneficial careers with an undergraduate degree or a graduate degree, how much more difficult have we made it for those folks? And particularly based on merit, less about anything else. And need.
I'm sorry, could you clarify what you mean in terms of the changes that you're seeing? Are
So in the big bill, I'll just say agnostically,
Yep.
it made it a little more difficult from my looking at, for this cohort of people, for a variety of reasons. But just analytically, trying to make sure the best and the brightest actually get access, and where federal grants and loans come into play in that regard.
I mean, I think the truth is it's going to make it less affordable for low-income students in terms of, I think we've seen, at least with some of the loan changes, we've seen a streamlining of some of the repayment plans, but I do think there's a system in which now low-income students are going to pay more. And so I don't know enough in the data to sort of see, you know, the sort of talent distribution amongst those individuals, but I think we have to assume and we have to believe that, I think to Justin's point earlier, anybody who wants to go to college and complete college and succeed should be able to go, and it should be affordable, and I think the federal government has a really important role in that. I was a Pell Grant student. I went to a community college, and then I transferred to a four-year. And back it was, I think Ms. Bonabinci is gone, but the combination of federal aid, grant aid, work study, along with lower costs at the state level and some additional funding allowed me to get out with very little debt. And students don't have that option now. They didn't, it was harder a few months ago. It's going to be even harder going forward with the implementation of this law.
Yeah, and again, in California, the community college system, getting an AA and then going on and get a bachelor's degree, was Pat Brown's vision, has really worked out well for the public. How about the disabled community? I spent a lot of time with the disabled community. They have a harder time getting through and getting jobs. How might that community be impacted by some of the changes, or just in general?
So my work hasn't focused specifically on students with disabilities, but I think that we know that when information is unclear or when support is cut, when there's less investment, it always harms the students who have the most barriers. And I think students with disabilities face additional barriers. So I think the same reforms that will help students, like clear information, stronger Pell Grants, affordability guarantees, are especially important for people with disabilities.
Just a brief observation. When we were having problems with some colleges, particularly for-profits, my predecessor, whose portrait's up here, and we worked together both in California and here to make sure that the marketing was accurate, so that they wouldn't get state loans in California if you were advertising an 85% opportunity to get a chef's job or something. And it worked. Got a lot of those people who are abusing the federal and state loans out of the business. So with that, I'll yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Now I'd like to recognize my colleague from Missouri, Mr. Under.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you to all the witnesses coming before the subcommittee today. Most parents' number one savings priority is college tuition, yet 3 out of 10 parents say they're unsure of what the final sticker price of college would be. I imagine it's actually higher than that. In recent years, parents have been taking out more loans and even dipping into retirement savings to send their kids to college. But unfortunately, there's little incentive for institutions to provide a good faith net cost estimate because they fear that doing so will drive families to a more affordable school. Institutions are under significant pressure to do whatever they can to generate more revenue and often resort to unethical tactics described by our witnesses today. According to the GAO, only 9% of institutions provide accurate net cost estimates in their financial aid offers. In 2008, Congress tried to address this price transparency problem by requiring all institutions to post a net price calculator on their website. Dr. Gillen, when the law was passed, it seemed like the net price calculator requirement was an important step toward transparency, but it has clearly been insufficient in this dysfunctional pricing system. What other reforms could help here?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the initial law was good. There was a long lead time. I think it was about 3 years from when the law was passed when the schools had to comply. And then when we saw what they did, they were all using different formulas. So they were all calculating, some were including loans, some weren't. And so these are basically not comparable across institutions for the most part. And they were also tended to be pretty difficult to find. And so I think addressing that, making it more standardized and more easily usable, I think would go a long way to fixing it. And I don't want to put a one-size-fits-all solution on this. So like I think we should have a universal methodology one, but I think we should also allow the colleges to say, okay, but this is what is unique about Grove City, or this is what's unique about my institution that this universal methodology doesn't fix, and here's what we think the real number is. But they have to report the kind of comparable one, and then they can make their case for why that doesn't fit for their particular institution.
You know, I found your testimony about the three different types of goods. You said search goods are like buying, you know, light bulbs at Walmart. Is it experience goods like restaurants, and then credence goods? What's a credence good?
So credence good is basically you don't know even after you purchased it if it was what you got.
Yeah.
Like realistically, like I don't know if my college education paid off until I'm like retired.
Yeah.
Like I'm sitting on my porch drinking iced tea, and like then I'm like, you know what, that was a good idea. I'm glad I did that. Like, but
It really is like that.
Yeah,
it really is like that. Yeah.
And so
lifetime earnings.
That's what's different.
As an engineer versus a poli-sci major. Okay, got it. You know, and I just can't help but to think, especially in this day and age, how many parents sent their kids off to school, and those kids got radicalized. Sometimes the universities, the colleges contributing to that radicalization, and sometimes even cut off their parents. No longer wanted to talk to people like them, usually meaning a MAGA Republican or such things. I just think we place a lot of trust in institutions of higher education, and we get very little good faith back in return in the financial aspect, or in the, if you will, moral development and intellectual development aspect. Mr. Wishing, Grove City, we only have a minute left. I mean, Grove City College, it sounds like it's doing exactly what we would want a college to do, give an actual price. And then produce outstanding outcomes. 96% of your graduates employed or enrolled in a graduate student within 6 months. What do you attribute this success to?
Well, number one, we're upfront about our price. I think people understand the value when they come in. We don't pull any punches about the rigor of Grove City. You've got to work hard to get a degree at Grove City. Employers know that. We generally attract families with students of families that have good values. They've got a good work ethic. They have to work hard at Grove City, and they've learned a lot. They're well prepared. But when they graduate, they don't leave those values on the graduation stage. That's all the companies are looking for. People are going to put in a hard day's work. They're prepared to do the job, and that's what we graduate.
Well, thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you so much. I'd like to now recognize my colleague from Connecticut, Mr. Courtney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses. Again, your testimony was really interesting, good reading, and obviously this is an important topic. The topic of the hearing, which is no more surprises, you know, when you talk about higher education, there's lots of surprises. And in fact, one of them happened while we were on recess, where on August 1st, the Department of Education announced that student loans that are in forbearance are now going to have interest accrual reinstated, which again, there was no heads up, no warning from Secretary McMahon. There was an article which AP and at News Nation actually reported that student loan payment pauses have doubled since last year. Again, we're talking about a universe of student loan borrowers in this country of 43 million Americans. That number in terms of people who are now in deferment jumped from about 2.5 million last year to over 10 million as we sit here in this hearing room. So that's a big surprise, and it's having a ripple effect on our economy. I mean, there's just no question that, adding debt and having the interest recapitalizing and accruing, which, say what you will about the last administration, they actually at least stopped that sort of cancer that happens to people's student loan balances because of the way the system, again, had just sort of been neglected for so long in terms of policymakers that really need to get into this problem. And clearly having accurate pricing and real pricing for families is a very laudable goal. And I think there's way too many students who are starting off in college with really not good awareness in terms of employability, et cetera. But again, they're also starting off this year with interest rates on their Stafford loans of 6.5%. Parent Plus are back up in the 9% range. Again, we went through a low interest rate environment for a while. That's now a thing of the past. And honestly, this subcommittee should be looking at this problem, which the Department of Education just worsened with their latest announcement in terms of the impact on, maybe there's people who want to defend that policy, but there's no question that the out-of-pocket costs that people are going to experience, because now interest is going to accrue again on the tens of millions of student loans that are out there that are again now just cascading back into deferral because of the I think botched job of the One Big Beautiful Bill. I mean, it's nice to say we're going to cap the amount of loans people can borrow, but if you're a medical student, having a cap on Stafford loans in terms of trying to get a specialty degree is no solution. It's just going to shove you into the private market where if you don't have any collateral to put down on a loan application, you're going to be in stratospheric interest levels. So in any case, another issue that's happening over at the Department of Education is that the National Center for Education Sciences, which again is the arm of the Department of Education that actually has the eyes on higher education, the staff has been gutted. Ms. Laitinen, maybe you can just sort of talk about the fact that, if we're really serious about trying to get to the bottom of transparency, we need to have headlights out there to see where we're going.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think we absolutely do. And, I think I don't know if it's an ideal world or not, but we don't live in a world in which you can do these things without people. And you need people who have real deep expertise, not just contractors or people who you can sub in and people who are doing 5 jobs. They'll say, I used to work at the Department of Education, and the career staff there work incredibly hard. They have incredibly deep expertise and knowledge, and they were understaffed before the rifts started happening. And they were understaffed and doing, I think, too much before all of the new requirements for HR 1. And if we are talking about trying to understand the impacts of some of the changes that you're talking about in terms of the bill, like, are students going to be pushed into the private market? We need to know that. We need to have the data to be able to understand that. Maybe they won't. Maybe it will lower the cost of college. Maybe it will be beautiful, but maybe it won't. And we need to find out. And in order to do that, you need data, and you don't just need random people who are doing the data. You need the deep expertise that we have have had in the National Center for Education Statistics, the Chief Data Officer, and all of those. I mean, all of those offices are just shells at this point.
Great. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. And I would like to recognize my colleagues from Guam, Mr. Mullen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member. Thank you, panel, for being here today. Price transparency is perhaps one of the most meaningful ways we can protect American students. Surprise costs, understated related expenses, and hidden fees endanger students' financial stability and the likelihood if they decide to graduate. So price transparency is also incredibly important for students from the islands, like Guam, where it costs prohibitive if I wanted to visit a campus and cities ahead of time, and decisions to go to school can be made without seeing the schools first. I couldn't do that. And students in remote areas, like my district, Guam, rely on clear, transparent pricing to make informed decisions about their future. I went to Hawaii for school for a couple of years just because my high school buddies were over there. I thought I could afford it. My parents gave me a couple $100. That's what I had to rely on. When I got to Hawaii, oh, I couldn't make it. But I found a lot of pennies on the ground. And I also did well with green stamps at the grocery stores when I'm buying canned food. But then I joined the Army, and the rest is history after that. And I'm still glad I graduated. Yeah, eventually got a 4-year degree. It's credence goods, is that's how you say it, Doc? Okay. So my first question is for you, Dr. Gillen. You argued in your testimony that higher education doesn't function like an ordinary competitive market, and colleges often compete for prestige in their fields. What effect does subsidy and prestige-driven spending have on students like us from Guam or the rural areas, and who may be navigating to the college market for the first time?
Yeah, that is a great question, because we actually see a very different effect with subsidies in higher education than we do in other industries. So like if you guys decide to subsidize like bread or something, we wouldn't expect for the price of bread to just increase. But there's pretty strong evidence that's what we do see in higher education, is that the availability of these financial aid programs actually lead the schools to charge more. And it's because we're stuck in that credence good model that we're seeing that impact. And so I don't want to oversell it. It's not a one-for-one thing. So if you provide $1 more of aid, it's not like they raise tuition by $1, but it's not zero either. And so there's a bunch of scholarly studies that tend to find it somewhere between like 40 and 70 cents is the increase in aid. And every once in a while you do see one that does see a full $1 increase. But yeah, and that is a very bizarre result that we don't see in other industries. And it's entirely because we're in this strange, bizarre competitive environment in higher education that subsidies work differently in this industry than they do in others.
Thank you. Another question for you. You also talked about price discrimination, and just give me a little bit more about disproportionate impacts for, again, the lower middle class income communities.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the great and bad things about higher education institutions is that they think they're doing really good work. And if they're a Christian college, they think they're doing the Lord's work. So they don't exactly feel bad about extracting more resources from students and parents. And so as long as they can convince themselves that what they're going to do with that money is worthwhile and good and beneficial, it reduces their hesitation to do so. And then when you look at some of the practices that have occurred, so one of the things that students do when they go to college, they fill out the FAFSA government form. The government actually shares those results with the colleges. And not only do they share like the headline numbers, they share, parent income, parent assets. Like these colleges know more about the students and the parents' finances than the IRS does. Not only that, they also, on the FAFSA form, you also list the colleges that you want to share the results with. And colleges will look at the order you rank them in that list on the assumption that you're going to rank your top school first. And so they'll adjust their financial aid offers based on where they show on that list. They're like, okay, if you apply to Duke, and I'm University of North Carolina, but you rank Duke #1, I might adjust to the financial aid that I offer you to either entice you to enroll, or basically say, oh, you're a lost cause because you're going to get into Duke and go there. And so the level of detail that the colleges at the top end, like community colleges are not doing this, open access institutions not doing this, but at the top end, the level of detail of price discrimination that they engage in is shocking.
Thank you for your answers. Thank you, panel. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You go back.
Thank you. I'd like to now recognize the ranking member for the full committee, a colleague from Virginia, Mr. Scott.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Laitinen, you mentioned the gentleman from California talked about inflation of the sticker price. You said there's a lower price. Can you say what the lower price inflation, to what people actually pay inflation has been? Has that been closer to regular inflation?
I don't actually remember off the top of my head. It certainly has been increasing at a much lower rate than the sticker price.
Okay.
And I'm looking at Andrew to see if you remember. Sorry.
So I think you're talking about net price versus sticker price.
Right.
And you can adjust both of those for inflation. But yeah, so net price will always be lower than sticker price. And so like at community colleges right now, like the average tuition sticker price is $4,000, but the average net price is actually minus $700. Because students get Pell Grants and they use some of it for housing. So like there's differences like that.
Thank you. Ms. Laitinen, you mentioned a couple of times about medical school. It's more difficult because of the big ugly bill. Why is it difficult? Specifically, why is it difficult to go to medical school?
Well, medical school is expensive, and it's really expensive. And now with the new loan limits, you used to be able to have unlimited borrowing for graduate programs of all kinds. And we can talk about whether or not, well, we used to have unlimited graduate borrowing. And that includes medical schools. And now under the new law, you have this limit for professional schools, which includes medical schools. And in many cases, it's not going to cover the cost of medical school.
And so unless you can cover the costs, you can't go.
Correct. And so you're either you need to have family money that's going to pay for it, or you're going to need to go to the private market. And that's going to really, I think, change who can become doctors in this country, which is probably, at least from my perspective, not an ideal policy outcome.
Thank you. And those that have taken out those massive loans, actually, because they became physicians, can actually pay them back. Is that right?
Absolutely, and I think that's a really important distinction with the medical, in the medical fields. They will earn enough to pay it back, so they should be able to borrow enough to be able to go and earn those dollars and provide that service to the community.
Thank you. Mr. Wishing, you mentioned several of the schemes, students subsidizing other students, for example. How do any of the pending transparency legislative proposals deal with any of those schemes?
I'm not familiar with those proposals, sir. My recommendation, I appreciate let me say this. The one proposal that I'm aware of is like the price guarantee for 4 years. I do think the marketplace would respond well to that.
Well, marketplace would respond well. How do colleges know what the costs are going to be 3 years from now? I mean, you got.
Well, that's a good point.
Some years,
yeah, sir, that's a good
inflation.
point. Inflation is particularly difficult, and I think you'd have to have an asterisk with that.
So
Depending on
you would have that safety valve in case you had 8% inflation like we had during COVID. You wouldn't stick them with a previous suggestion that the price wouldn't go up.
Frankly, I think it could get schools in a bind if you saw a sudden spike
Okay.
in inflation, sir. My recommendation would be to consider that. I think it would be helpful for families. I do think there's a pretty easy solution here. In the cost of attendance, just have schools, and I think you guys have a lot of this information, by the way, but just have schools report their break-even cost.
Well, I'm not sure that's part of a legislative proposal, but
Okay.
let me ask you another. We have a habit around here of having a proposal and then coming up with complaints and never showing how the proposal actually deals with the complaints. But if a college decided to admit students on a merit, need-blind basis and guaranteed that everybody who got admitted would be able to afford to go because that'd make it affordable. Some colleges, for example, say if you make less than $60,000, you can get in. How could you avoid that kind of scheme you've talked about?
I'm not sure if I understand the question, sir.
Well, if a college is admitting people need blind,
Well, yeah, I think that's an interesting question. I do think in the case of Grove City, sir, we do want to know what students' need is, and we're very clear about trying to help students fund that need.
well, Mr. Drayden, did you want to?
We can help students if we know what their need is, but we don't want to bamboozle some students to
Okay, well,
help
Mr.
others.
Braden, do you want to comment very quickly?
Yeah, very quickly, Mr. Scott, I think you're hitting on a very important point, which is schools are looking for ways that they can, under some safety net or umbrella, collaborate together to be much more transparent, meet student need, but they are very afraid of talking to one another for fear of violating antitrust or being accused of violating some antitrust provisions. And we have to find some ground to allow them to not control prices, but find some ways to meet full need or affordability guarantees and still collaborate on best practices to do that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I'd like to recognize Mr. Gruffman for a statement.
I'm sorry, I misled the committee before. I now talked to someone, I misled him as to what a beginning Walmart truck driver is making. It's about 135 grand a year. I didn't want to overstate it before, so now I've confirmed it. So, you know, if you are advising anybody and they're up in the air whether to go to college, make sure they only take the best. Not your other companies don't pay that much, but it's 135 grand a year, and that's before the 6%, 401k match and all the wonderful bonuses you might get. But just so you know, kind of surprising, huh?
Thank
And that's
you.
just in little old Wisconsin. Who knows what they make in New York?
Thank you, Mr. Gruffman. Appreciate that. Okay, we're going to now look at closing, during our closing remarks. I'd like to recognize Ms. Adams for her closing remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you once again to our witnesses for speaking with us today. Since President Trump took office and congressional Republicans lined up to do his bidding, college has gotten less accessible and more expensive. As the cost of college continues to rise, students and families need adequate transparency and meaningful support from institutions of higher education. Paying for college shouldn't require families to jump through hoops and navigate opaque, confusing systems without help. And that's why resources like the Office of Federal Student Aid are critical to student success. Yet the Trump administration has ripped away those resources, slashed grants for students, and overall made college more expensive with provisions in the big ugly law. It's true that colleges and universities must work towards greater price transparency for students and families. But let me be clear. If we truly want to deliver on our promises to students, then we must take a comprehensive look. Not only transparency, but the broader issues facing higher education today, including high tuition costs, crushing loan debt, and campus safety. You know, I mentioned in my earlier comments about the gaps that students face and that families face, but we've got to figure out a way how families fill those gaps with aid and scholarship that they don't have to pay back. And I can tell you that it's a problem for, one size doesn't fit all. I know that that closing these gaps for first-generation college students, as I was, those are very challenging, especially students who attend our HBCUs. And so while I appreciate the discussion today in this hearing, it's time that we face reality. College affordability will not be magically solved by bullying institutions into providing transparency while leaving institutions on their own with no help from the department due to recent rifts. But we must fight back against the Trump administration's unfettered attacks on higher education, and we've got to work with institutions to prioritize affordability and success for all students, not just the wealthy and well-connected. And thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to our witnesses today. I yield back.
Thank you. This has been a very enlightening hearing, and I want to thank everyone that's sitting here. You know, I think about growing up, the concept of college, what it meant, and I think we've lost our way along the way. It used to be where higher education was a legacy, and I'm part of that legacy, by the way. My grandfather was a third-grade dropout. My dad went to war, to GI Bill, went to Ohio State, got his PhD in agronomy, was 40 years and a college professor, very successful entrepreneur. His legacy is me sitting here, going to the University of Miami, and now here in Congress. That's the way it has always been in the past. Education was supposed to be our gateway. HBUs, during the days of segregation, during the time I grew up, Their mission, very simply, was to produce the greatest minds ever to go out and represent their communities, to command respect, because that's what the goal was. And at that time, black communities, hate speech youth graduated more, a higher percentage of black men than any other race out there. So from that point to where we are now means we've lost the mission. And it's time for us to bring back, talking about ethical, the idea of the product should be our kids, not the institution, not to bloat our bureaucracy with a lot of people making a lot of good income. It should be, what is the mission to make our country the greatest in the history of mankind? And I'm so thankful we're finally having this conversation, because obviously this has been going on for quite a while, to where it's muscle memory. You just do it and sit in summits, and people think of all kind of unethical ways of doing things and they see no wrong with it. That's not who we are. So I'm excited about the fact that, first of all, you're here to educate us all. I now know what credence goods are. I will never forget that. To my last day, I'll say, was it really worth it? It is about return on investment. We have to be as innovative in this industry as we are in everything else we do. What is it can we do to tweak the innovation to make sure our kids are coming out smarter, better, more hopeful, not ever thinking it was a waste of time? And what is the right niche? So we're going to start doing that. And I'm so thankful we have a panel here on both sides of the aisle. We realize we need to address this issue. We're going to lean in very hard. I think if I can just make one last ask, I think we have a very innovative legislative body now, House, Senate, and the President. We want to get this right. Our big ask is, as innovative legislators, we need to hear from you. We need to know, what does that mean? What does it mean to tweak this so that it's truly the best experience for the kids coming in, for parents thinking that was a great choice for them? So we're going to ask you guys to do that. I would say, be more proactive than you ever have been. Think outside the box more than you ever have been. Know that we're willing to hear this, and we're willing to work with you. We have to be as innovative. And I think we take the special wonder we have now that we're having these conversations and make that happen. So I want to thank you seriously for this particular hearing. I've learned a lot, things I had never known about and now know, and now we now know we have to get moving to get things accomplished. I'd like to thank the witnesses again for taking the time to testify before the subcommittee today. Without objections, there being no further business, the subcommittee stands adjourned. Thank you so much.